I mean by managing, not like tell them what to do, more like trying to improve their efficiency. I mean, other than I wouldn't call it life coaching or something like that. That's a little different. That's more like motivating someone to do something. But ultimately they're in charge of stuff. The decision making. Scout out a person who life coach is not the thing. Life coaches don't increase efficiency. They help the person discover decisions that will impact their life, but ultimately they have no uh they don't have executive ability to make decisions for the person. An assistant of some sort is probably the closest thing, like someone who arranges meetings. It's more of a secretarial job, but I don't know if there's a specific title for someone who caters specifically to just one person. But if you know what I mean, someone who micromanages the daily ins and outs of someone. They're more enablers. Life coach is more influencers. Their life coach involves with the task of influencing the person. I don't particularly want to influence anyone's task. I think I do feel like like a power PA, yeah, personal assistant. I do truly believe in my hearts of hearts that if I see a winning person, right, someone who's just have all the ideas and they have so much potential, but that potential is faulted and bottlenecked at self-care, right? That's kind of the role that I feel it would be so rewarding to see someone like, hey, I'm gonna remove your need to think about your self-care because you are a remarkable person, an extraordinary person, but because you have to focus on that, you cannot you have to deviate all your efforts from focusing on yourself, right? The self-care part. But I enjoy doing that. I enjoy a lot to help people with their self-care so that they don't have to think about it, and then they can focus on their passions and what have you, like all their incredible ideas and whatnot. Life coaching is kind of sort of like that, I would say, to some extent, but life coaching tends to be you're the person providing the inspiration to help them pass their gap. So eventually it would help them become more efficient at taking care of themselves. Not. I just want to be part of the action. I don't mind. It would be awesome to like have like a mutual relationship with someone being like, hey, you're a superstar, but I want to do the maintenance stuff. I like tracking someone. I like doing the day-to-day tracking of someone's progress. Kind of fun. I mean, I thought about doing some some superficial certification for life coaching a bit ago. It could happen this year just because I want to. The reason it costs money, right, to do the certification, but I'm genuinely curious what kind of techniques these certification things require. Obviously, my perspective is quite different since I was a trained professional, and it's more for academics as opposed to blowing my mind in terms of education, right? But I want to know what the standards are. That's pretty much why I would. It's around like 3K, 4K, and it takes half a year to get certified by the most, like, at least the most recognizable standard for life coaching. And I want to know what their standards are, basically. It doesn't really matter. Oh, wait, you can get... Oh, you can get mahogany from here, too. So let's go and grab the wood piles from here. The idea behind what I'm saying is it doesn't really matter how educated or well informed you are. Sometimes when you're working in a professional setting for too long, or you have certain perspectives, it's nice to double check your perspective with the standards, because you also want to work efficiently, not extra hard, right? For this case though, life coaches, become life coach, I'm a little wary about that type of profession, since it doesn't have a cap as well. And without a cap, I can get myself into trouble. Without a cap, it means that the sky's the limit. So I could easily enter through a spiraling cycle of diminished return, which I've done many, many times over. Standardization is what helps me at least stay out of trouble, but not also overwork myself. It happens a lot. It's kind of I don't think this is a problem for most people. Generally speaking, sufficiency is what people think about when they think about jobs. But my major career in my life didn't deal with sufficiency. It dealt with the best possible outcome. So often that mindset continues to stay with me. When you do a task, you do to the best of your ability until you run out of time. And I feel that type of quality really helps with the career path I was formerly part of, but pragmatically speaking is not sustainable. And there isn't a system that sustains it. So like funding doesn't sustain the best work. Funding sustains the sufficient work. Because if you keep aiming to do the best, you will most likely miss the mark in terms of efficiency all the time. So life coaching is one of them, right? Psychology, psychiatry, it's pretty much more or less why I stray away from offering or being part of a medical profession or something like that, because the sky's the limit. You want to maximize a person's health. You don't just go for, or my personal goal would not be to go for, oh, this person is sufficiently happy and therefore my job is done, or this person asked me to solve one problem and that's the only problem that I'm obligated to solve. That's just, whenever it deals with a person, I can get into trouble, because it won't ever feel like I have closure on doing the task. Hence, I haven't ever tackled a professional career that actually literally involved the person without a deadline. So students, I certainly will drive myself into the ground trying to do that, but at least for the student, they matriculate, right? They rotate and they continue to move on. So there's a deadline. Deadlines are to a lot of people are inherently just something that makes it so that they just need to meet it. But for me, deadlines are a way to cap what I can do. Because if there isn't a cap, I'm gonna burn out. I've learned that a long time ago, that the reason why I don't procrastinate because I'm lazy. I procrastinate because I cap from burning out. So whenever someone gives me a deadline, I would always plan just enough time to complete it by the deadline so that I liberate all my time, as opposed to doing something early and I would burn out all the way to the deadline. And then I would get no return. Like, in reality, all the extra time you burn extra to the end, they're generally always diminished return. Like, it's unfortunate, but in most professions, if you go beyond a certain threshold, you're exponentially losing value in your return. Sure, if it's your dream job and you can possibly eke out the edges, right? But it's not sustainable. For a person, you have to be a superhero, and I truly believe like CEOs and stuff who basically sacrifice every semblance of their personal life to reach that is deserving of utmost respect. Absolutely. It's just for me, I can't do that. Or I've discovered I can't do that. In a different parallel universe, if I didn't burn so hot, perhaps I wouldn't be on Twitch now, and like I would be doing stuff like coming up with the next iteration of genetic screening products or screening protocols for integration into general practitioners' routines for like physical examinations. That was kind of one of my visions, right? I wanted to create a extreme efficient way of cross-referencing genetic screening and creating an interface so that general practitioners can have a very low barrier of entry to screening their patients for potential predispositions, like markers for like cancer and whatnot, and collaborate by integrating like UI designs and programmers that I know to create an interface that would lower the barrier for general practitioners to integrate genetic screening into their work routine. So then genetic screenings would become cheaper, faster, more intuitive, so that it removes the need for the patient or the doctors to know how to operate complex scripting and data mining protocols to gain access to the meaningfulness of their genetic screen data. And then all while linking that to a bigger database, which allows double blind and anonymity between the databases in order to do further genetic research, offering a anonymous data bank or data set for genetic research moving forward. I'm sure a bunch of old colleagues and other departments that I've heard of and been a part of in some way is collaborating on this as we speak. There's a lot of government red tape and whatnot too, and privacy concerns, and how to utilize all that. So you would need to collaborate with like representatives, legislation, all that stuff to move it forward. So it's like a whole life thing, and that stuff is something I considered for a while, and I wouldn't see it come to fruition until I'm like in my 60s. These things take they're like 20 to 30 year projects. It would take the work of at least 12 people across 12 different disciplines, at least 12 experts collaborating together in order to make that a reality. So I asked myself if I had the rigor and ability to see that through. The answer is no. At least I won't find myself spearheading such an effort. There are really well-established experts and people that even when I was a dreamer of such things, um, that have already started envisioning these. Yeah, some part of me thought I could be part of that team, which I could still technically be, but just someone else's responsibility. I do believe there is going to be a way to balance uh harvesting genetic screen data anonymously, double blind, into a single database, which then can be used for genetic research, but at the same time preserve like double N encryption and preserve the anonymity of the consented genetic screenings that come from general practitioner and then eventually general practitioner's office, and then it would feed forward. So but the groundworks for protecting the privacy in both ends has to go first in order to make it usable, at least in the United States. And then that creates a self-feeding forward database for genetic research moving forward. And then it continuously, you would need continuous maintenance with like computer science experts and stuff to develop an interface that keeps updating and becoming more and more efficient between accessibility from the general practitioner and the patients that are involved who voluntarily consent to this, making guarantees that their privacy is included and cannot be exploited for like insurance companies and stuff to create claims against them. And in fact, to encourage this, one could hire a policy maker to make a compromise, maybe even incentivize people to consent to sharing their genetic screen data, their personal information anonymously, and contribute them to this database. So you need like a whole infrastructure of incentivized contribution of personal health information for the benefit of future generations. And all that requires millions of dollars of like construction, structure, collaboration for all the little working models and tools that are required in it. You kind of, I've been following some of these things. So like whenever someone talks about genetic information, they talk about how they're making this more like cheaply, more reliable and efficient. And then are there any people are going to automate this, you know, create interfaces that people can easily log into and register these things. It has to become a routine. And once the routine becomes extremely efficient, then it's naturally feeded forward. It becomes normalized. And in the future, it'd be like, hey, I'm going to prick your finger, and the next day everything is automated, everything's registered. Even the instrument measure to do the screening will upload the data automatically. And what you would get back, what you see as a patient and the practitioner, is an informed screen of all the known developments of known genetic markers that can help inform seeing what a patient will likely encounter and to mitigate all that. So screening would become vastly more efficient. Not necessarily more reliable, but the idea is when you put all this infrastructure down, any newer discovery from basic science, which is a field that is poorly funded, still they could actually even use that as a reason to get funding. So then companies and stuff would see money in this. Insurance companies would see money in this, so they would invest in basic science again, at least genetic research, to continue to contribute to the central system that is enhancing the screening process. Because in insurance company, one of the major driving forces is to constantly always have people who are less prone to, you know, getting sick and ill. So investing forward in a genetic screening process that helps people determine the best course of action to stay healthy, honestly, is a hidden in extra savings on expenses for insurance companies. Because the more efficient genetic screening is, and the more informed general practitioners are and patients about their lifestyle, the healthier they stay. And these individuals will still buy insurance for the sake of in case something terrible happens, but that likelihood goes down. So insurance companies get less claims, so they make more money in the long run. So it creates like all this stuff can all come from just these things, and it's so complex. It's so complex, it makes my head spin. I just want to be a cog in this system back in the day, because there was no way I would be someone who was capable of. It's too overwhelming for me. Like, you need policy work, just everything that you need to make this work is crazy complex. I just wanted to be that guy that's responsible for creating the interface, the working like computational work that requires to bridge the data deposition and an interpretation of the data. And then I want to be one of the people who were the leaders in analyzing that database for my own purposes, like my own genetic research interest. It's still kind of hodgepodge right now. Like, it's very disjointed. Each of the specialists that are required, they're concerned with their own things. It's difficult to get such a large consortium of experts to agree on things, because as they are experts, they are less likely to relate to each other about the priorities of their field. And it happens between a biochemist, a chemist, a structural biologist, a geneticist, let alone bridging the gap between legislation, like constitutional law, privacy, like getting those people to even see on the same page. That's like, you can't even get related sciences to see the similar priorities. It's a really big obstacle to even bridge that. And that's the stuff I don't want to do. I do not have an act for it. It would be, that's what leaders are for. A lot of times I feel like leadership is underrated because it's hard to appreciate what a leader does and the skill set that a leader has and a personality that a leader has that isn't necessarily something tangible, like an knowledge of something. The leader, a leader can combine, can make people collaborate without any knowledge or intimate knowledge of any of the experts. That's a skill that comes around. Well, how many presidents of the United States are there so far? So, like, how many leaders of countries are there? There are far less than there are scientists. Appropriate ones, like successful ones. Or consistent ones. However you want to call it. That's a slight digression, but I think about it all the time. I do want to be part of policy work at some point. Okay. So I think we've we only have 5K. We can build more bedrooms, I think. What's our bedroom situation? 2. We can buy 4 silk sheets. Oh, money came in. Nice. Ooh, 9,900. All right. We basically were just collecting mahogany planks as much as we can. All right, so let's assign someone to this. Okay. We can generally do the comfort person. What is this? A distillery? Hold the phone. I hope distilleries are transferable. What did I learn last time? I learned that special buildings are shared among the entire location. So yeah, let's build a distillery down here. I don't remember if distillery gives bad schwuff. Wait, is dining room a bad thing? No, dining room's not a bad thing. So let's put a distillery over here. Oops. A distillery in the basement, of course. Appropriate place, eh? Appropriate place. Wait. What's wrong? It doesn't meet the minimum size requirement? What the heck? Distilleries are big. What the heck? Four? Oh, okay. Alright. So the Pinefall combines all the extra. Pinefall requires all the extra stuff. I don't even have level 2 distillery stuff, when I think about it. I haven't bought any of those, stuff. I actually don't know what's the purpose of level 2 special buildings yet. Because it didn't quite say you need them, except for the requirements to increase, like, maybe prestige and stuff. Maybe that's the idea. Well, minimally, because we need to upgrade the distillery at some point. So here's a tap. Oh, it's only 3 seats. Awkward. Okay. Darn. I thought it was 4. Alright, so we got the distillery. Now... Right? Yes. So now we can take distillery requests. Oh. Wow, we're gonna need a lot of room. Oh, we're gonna need a lot of special rooms. Do I want to add a weight over here? No, no. Alright, we're gonna go buy some silk. Or silk. Oh, hey. I didn't realize there's fuel behind the area. It's not to diminish the complexity of people's problems, but I truly and earnestly believe I do not wish people to be extremely well informed. I feel the most adequate, the best compromise for individuals is to be sufficiently informed so that they can be happy and make decisions that are consistently making them happy. I don't particularly think it's wildly, even biologically great for your fitness, like as a person, like how fitness, not in terms of like how physically strong you are, but mental and all that, to be too informed. You start spending an extraordinary amount of time thinking about things that can spiral into just a feeling of nihilism and being overwhelmed. So often I tend to focus on self-care first. I think individuals who can master self-care can continue to slowly add more and more in arcade more and more they can slowly take on more and more tasks or enable themselves to handle more and more tasks. It's not a competition to be the most educated and the most informed. I think the internet kind of broke and basically bolted past biological evolution to handle most of these things. So automation, our technology, automation and stuff is compensating for technological advances. So as technology continues to advance, information is faster and faster, and to offset basically how slow biological adaptation is, we're offsetting the load constantly, the excess load, by increasing the efficiency of our technology. The less thinking, more doing, but doing at the pace of our biological capacities. And we're constantly searching for that balance. Right now we're seeing the fallout of basically the early signs of what happens when humans are provided too much information too rapidly. And then now most of the technology we're focused on is to reduce how to better organize and inform ourselves with that rapid information. We're compensating for our biological appropriateness. Our biology, in my opinion, is not sufficient to tackle the unbelievable breakneck pace of information we are gathering. We cannot synthesize and process that information without aided technology. So we're using technology to offset. You can kind of interpret the advancement of AI and machine learning and these automations as a compensation for our biological limits. You can say it's weird to think about this, but perhaps the brain does have a limit for now. Maybe 10 generations later, humans will become bigger brained. Who knows? Technology might offset that to the point where we're just going to augment that instead. That's another prevailing theory, right? But for now, Gen Z and Gen Alpha are beginning to show the signs of what happens when a generation is grown within the information revolution, as opposed to a millennial like myself, which can still slow things down. Like older people like you, Silver, and I have experienced a time where we can appreciate and emotionally gather about slowing down. However, our next generation, the people following us, do we as older generation try to moderate that so that they can know how to slow down? Can we effectively do that? And our generation is trying to figure out how to find this compromise. There's too much information. There's one consistent outcome of having too much information: overwhelming anxiety and depression. Those are like the symptoms that are becoming clearer and clearer as the generation is getting older. And until we won't live long enough to see the bootstrapping of a whole generation under this intense pressure. But it's very consistent to know that a human being cannot operate at a speed that technology is offering. And that just leads to being overwhelmed. So the most consistent effect of the information revolution right now is burnout. Burnout as a consequence of being overwhelmed, and just glass ceiling. Our biology is not, in my opinion, set to accommodate the sudden influx. So I look forward to seeing how machine learning, AI assisted, augmented, task-based performance is going to help offset the future generation, so that the future generation can maybe even mitigate self-care in that context. Self-care is information organization too. I think that's underappreciated right now. Algorithms right? These things are helping to mitigate certain decision making we have to make. The 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 dangers of that is the ones in control of these automations have the brunt of influence. So now you have to talk about policy, ethics, and morality as well of who controls how the automation works. But yeah, it's really to offset the biological constraints. Our brains are amazing. It can create certain things, but it can't semantically download and digest and organize information at a rate that is exponentially beyond our way of processing it biologically. And it leads to anxiety, burnout, and depression, ultimately. I'm more focused on that because there's nothing more consistent than that. Human brains have a limit. Technology, maybe not. Not sure. Not sure where the line is drawn for technology at the moment. Okay. I was gonna make another bedroom, right? Yeah. Wait, did I buy more? I don't know if I bought more silk. I feel like I went over and bought more silk. Hot take. One of the best skills, in my opinion, one of the skills that will continue to pay out for future generations, for your kids, if you have a little one now, meditation, slowing down, knowing that you can't know everything. Those kind of skills, that type of mindset is going to pay out for, it's largely top priority, in my opinion, for the benefit and mental health of the future generation. Because they will be increasingly going to be in a position where they have to perform beyond their physical limits. And when I mean physical, I include the brain now. That is the new thing. Back in the day, it was like, oh yeah, it's physical limitations. Like, you know, you're not as strong, you're not as fast. And it's like, now the brain is being capped too. That used to be the thing where like, oh, but if you're not strong and physically powerful, you can be smart. There aren't too many things that pretty much supersedes the brain, right? There is now. It's the internet. It supersedes the brain. It just, we do not have enough computational power to sort most of that stuff out biologically. So encouraging kids to take shortcuts, augment, learn how to use tools to offset the demands, that will protect that problem from occurring. Well, it will mitigate. It won't it'll attempt to protect. It's not to say that it's a surefire thing, but these are skills and mindsets that can really go a long way, in my opinion. So nowadays, whenever I'm offering advice to people, like kiddos and stuff, right? Oh, you can't actually go. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, this thing is in the way. The most effective, like, piece of advice for those who are experiencing this, the symptom is basically being overwhelmed with information. I don't want to make it sound, it's basic, as in it's simple by concept, but it's difficult in execution. It's incredibly difficult in execution to find a approachable way to try to get youth to appreciate that you're being bombarded with all the things you need or require to do, and you really don't have another framework at all for this. So breathe. And it's so ironic because the meme is like, go out, touch grass, sit down, stare at a tree, breathe, that kind of thing. It will be very hard to have someone do that out of the blue. So what you can do often is to use psychology to associate and form new habits without necessarily feeling like tackling them like they're sacrificing time and whatnot. So I've been working on these methods for a while, like taking inspiration from other people and basically coming up with trying out various approaches to getting individuals to be more receptive to that type of idea and how to do it more efficiently each time. That's kind of the idea at the moment that I'm working towards. Writing something like that and whatnot. Oops. It's not rotating. Alright. Nailed it, I guess. Because I believe I will have to redefine. He will be raised in a household where success is not your career track or your yes. Yeah. And I'll strongly believe that it will help with this. Yeah. Yeah. Helping someone discern the value system, right? A value system that can move forward, that is more likely to protect the youth. Like having a value system that's more adaptive and more dynamic is gonna be far more consistent in what they're going to face in the future than rigid ones. So you as a person have to compromise on, okay, what can cover most of the values that I personally believe in while making it flexible enough that in case, you know, the future just takes a 180, you know what I mean? Like it just, you can only wish for the best and give them the most flexible tools in case history just takes a different course. It just wildly unpredictable at this point. You can rest assured that you gave enough flexibility for while encompassing everything you're comfortable with. The more rigid it's going to be, the less likely your kids are going to be able to change and adapt if something just changes beyond what you can predict, right? So right now, consistently, kids that have more flexibility in their approach are doing quite a bit better, like consistently. It's not to say they're more successful. It's just they're doing more consistent. They're a lot more consistent across the board. You have wide range when it's rigid. It's so much harder. I mean, I'm not gonna say my parents didn't have it hard. They had other restrictions. They have mandatory resource limitations, you know, but they had status quo. They had vision, the stuff that is hardline. That rigidity made my parents successful because they know the path. They can visualize and see what is necessary to be successful in their time. Your child is going to have a future that is anything. It's so hard to predict now what is going to be the status quo. So focusing on things like relational building and network, that dependency or that skill is going to continue to be relevant because it's going to involve other humans. We're not going to entertain the idea that Skynet and artificial intelligence is going to take over humanity and all that stuff. Well, let's just save that for science fiction for now. But it is a very distinct possibility, perhaps introducing children to the idea of what an artificial life form is. Who knows? That could be a bag. But for now, we know that the future involves other humans, right? And that skill is inherently dynamic, the ability to interact with other human beings. So, priority number one still, and it still exists, right? We know even in our generation, it still exists. If there's a skill you want, interacting with other human beings are the skills. So, at least one thing can be consistent, which is the ability to interact with other human beings. That is not being taught on the internet. That is not being taught for a lot of Gen Z and Gen Alpha people. They are being told what is right or wrong about what people do, not how to interact with people. So now you have the biggest obstacle. You have a whole generation of people that have problems interacting with other people, like in a really deeper, meaningful way. They're often only interacting superficially. Like, hey, I like this game. You like this game. Oh, wait, I eat this banana just the way like my favorite detached role model I observe eats bananas. That's cool. You do too? Nice. There's no like a deeper connection. So that is being removed at the moment. At the moment. And it's wonderful. I'm not saying it's going to be the case for the long time. I think the people in our generation, the 30s and the 40s generation, it's branching to that. Now the medium, the trend that is interesting is about human interaction, about self-care. So the future will normalize in a way. Whenever there's a problem that's presented that becomes relatable to the majority, there will be a response. So I wouldn't say that this will be absent in the future, that there aren't, but the content right now, this very moment, the content does not emphasize a depiction of people. It's a depiction of people's achievements, but not how they achieve it, what they had to do to achieve it. And it often, most definitely involves interacting with other people. And it's the skill set that is completely avoidant most of the time, because you're seeing the end, you're not seeing the process. There is a trend, though. There's a trend that is going towards, hey, I want to see how it happens. I want to be part of your journey. So now there's a demand at the moment, at the current moment, there's a demand for these types of content because the content creation have bootstrapped the end stuff now. It's like, yeah, we've seen this before, but how did you do it? So it is trending up. So I mean, all my concerns could already be dispelled in the future. So like, say your son, when they grow up to be teenagers, that might, whatever I'm saying now may be irrelevant. And we moved fast enough as a whole community of a species. We moved quick enough to respond to the evolution of information. And then it may be a moot point. The idea is we prepare as much as we can with the information we have now, instead of saying what ifs for the future, right? You just do as much as you can based on the information we have now. And one of them is human interaction skills. They're very, very deficient. It was already deficient in like schools. Like formal education, in my opinion, was already deficient. Like learning how to public speak, writing, why you learn to write, why you learn grammar, linguistics. All these things are sidelined by the need to know how to do them, not why they do them. So it was already deficient in formal education. It's just exaggerated now in on the internet. Now you get information. You get any information you want. But the purpose, the vision, the perspective on these skills are not to be seen. Like, why do you want this? It's like, well, because I say so, or because your most popular influencers say so. They're not, the content creators are not people who are trained to focus on the process. A lot of the systems favor a result. So naturally, content creators want to show results, not all the bootstrapping that required to create the results. Ends justifies the means. School got to the point where it did somewhat focus on the process. But generally speaking, when there isn't an answer, the focus is on the process. When do you learn that? College and higher education. So by the time you get there, most people aren't getting there anymore. So high school and stuff, they teach you results. They teach you foundations, the things we know in order to create a foundation. By the time you get to process focusing is when there aren't answers. So the higher you go in education, you just learn that there aren't answers. So what's the focus? The process. Because that's the only thing you can control at this point. Because there aren't any answers. You use bootstrapping a lot. Can you tell me what it means for my usage? Bootstrapping is like if I tell a kid, okay, study harder. Say they got a bad grade. Okay, try something else to study even harder. Okay, but what if bootstrapping is not the key? You have to give them another tool. Say, all right, let's try not to focus on studying. Try to have more fun. How do you do that? Try to make this more relevant to yourself. That's not bootstrapping. That's finding alternatives. So right now, there's a lot of bootstrapping of things, but there isn't alternatives. They're not becoming, individuals are not becoming more dynamic. They're being reinforced to do the same thing. How do you find information about that? Go on Wikipedia. How do you find information about this? Go on Wikipedia. Say, what happens when Wikipedia breaks down? Your whole bootstrapping process breaks down. Your whole bootstrapping logic breaks down. How do you find an answer when Wikipedia does not have an answer? That's not bootstrapping. That's finding alternatives. So the way information is presented now, it traps individuals into bootstrapping their skills. So they don't acquire new skills. They just refine and constantly iterate on their old skills and hope that is good enough. In fact, they don't hope, they believe it's good enough, and then they no longer seek to add more skills to their skill set. So a specialist, what they do is they bootstrap and refine and iterate until they become the best at that one thing. But there can be problems that are fundamentally not solved by the thing you spent most of your life bootstrapping, basically. Oh, wait, hold up. Wait, is that really what you get? Maybe I'm using the term improperly. Hold up. That is the number one definition. Get oneself or something into or out of a situation using existing resources. Wait. Get one sub or something into or out of a situation using existing resources. The company is bootstrapping its sub out of a marred financial past. Oh yeah. Okay, that's fine. That's actually okay, I guess. It's about repeating what you already know. So like, I'm using it figuratively, not literally. So like, oh, you have money, right? How do okay, So I want to do something in my business. I don't have enough money. The solution is to make more money. All right, well, I know these ways to make money. Okay, well, I'll just do them more to get more money. And then I got more money. I still don't have more money. So I'm just going to upscale the same thing I'm doing to make even more money. That's bootstrapping. You already know what to do, so you're just going to keep doing it more and hope that it's sufficient. Instead of, what's another way I could make money? All right, I need money, but what about if I reduce how much money I need? Yeah, you're not instead of diversifying. So it's not, bootstrapping is not bad or good. There are appropriate times to use them. It's just having the ability to diversify and bootstrap makes you ultimately far more flexible. It's not about having one or the other. It's about having both at the same time. So the internet, what algorithm does right now, for now, the concerns and stuff about algorithm is that it leads to bootstrapping. You type something you like to see, you're going to get more of what you like to see. And it goes with logic, it goes with evidence collection, it goes with critical thinking. It bootstraps what you believe to be true. And mere exposure, the thing that I talk about a lot in psychology, works with bootstrapping. The more you do it, the more you believe in the process. But it's going to be the only process that you believe in. You will stop over time believing or wanting to incorporate other things. So it's reinforcing. The trade-off is diversifying is not efficient. It's terribly inefficient. So the trade-off is, if you want to be efficient, you bootstrap, because you already know how to do these things. You don't have a forward investment. But there are many times where you cannot bootstrap it because it inherently, that skill is not equipped to help you. One thing the internet does right now is it inherently diminishes a person from independent thought. Right now, just for at the very present, the current state of content creation is bootstrapping on trends. What a trend is just that. It just keeps bootstrapping itself, so that idea will become center stage. Meanwhile, while you're exposed to this, you have basically removed the potential of any way of diversifying. And all the infrastructure right now, people are asking philosophically or like morally, ethically, is, do we need to have to do something about this? Because kids do not diversify naturally anymore. The majority of their activity is causing them to be specialists. Even if they know it or not, they are already restricted the more often they use the internet. What if there was a bunch of content creators who just randomly love touching grass? That's diversifying. But the kid has to know that touching grass is a diversifying skill in order to actually even bootstrap that. But here's the danger, right? The way algorithms work right now, for the time being, there's not a semblance of too much white noise. If they learn that touching grass is the best trending thing, they'll continue to touch grass. What does that happen? That takes you away from being able to collect information on the internet, like all the other things. So they're just going to keep touching grass. There's a little too much of whatever thing gets exposed first. You're bootstrapping the thing. And a human, the more dynamic a human is, the more diversified a human is, they become adaptive and they create independent thought. So right now, you have people, I'm depressed. How do I know I'm depressed? Well, you go online, you look at all the people who talk about depression. Okay, checklist here, here, here. It's like, oh, I fit all those, so I'm depressed. Okay, what do you get more? More things about how you're depressed. And then you continue. So they firmly believe that they are depressed. They aren't ever the trend doesn't include a myriad of things about depression. They don't include individuals who seek hard solutions to depression. See, the trend is a one track mind. It does not diversify. And even within the details, like, hey, something is bad. X is bad. And if that trends, that's the only line of thought that will be reiterated over and over again because it is trending. It's not, hey, here's a counter argument to this. Hey, here's another perspective to this. There's going to be one dominant trend and it bootstraps on itself. It just keeps reiterating the same thing. There's no counter arguments, no other perspectives. Basically, you're not talking to a human. The content creator in frame, in that context, in that video, is a one-dimensional piece of that person. It's the thing that they refine and concisely iterate over and over again. It's the best approach they have. It doesn't represent their whole being, like, oh, they have some reservations and whatnot. That doesn't come through in what's in frame. So now you have kids who have no framework at all to question whatever they see. And then whatever they see, however rare, the algorithm is going to fetch that. So they believe that touching grass is bad. The algorithm can convince you that touching grass is bad. Because when they look and type, is touching grass bad? Then most of the content that will be fed to them is touching grass is bad. So it constantly bootstraps. There's no deviation from the content. So it's partially also because of the way content creators make a living off the system, and then the system is too simplified at the moment to diversify. And a lot of government policy workers and stuff are butting heads with companies and stuff, especially Google, to see where the compromise is. Where can we make it more natural so that human beings don't, like kids, at least kids. I wouldn't say anyone who's like 30 or 40 plus who predated the internet would have a identity crisis or something that dwarfs their independent thought. But even then, like those who really are very influenced, I would say like a good majority of 30 to 40s still can be greatly influenced and buy into convincing themselves. You can still have principles and beliefs while still being aware of other things. It might take away from your resolve, but you can still be a very principled person, for sure. But kids don't really have a choice, to be honest. The moment they type in their first search result, that will probably take less than a week. I would say reasonably probably less than a month to be hardwired into their thought process. And it would take another counter argument, another strong force to break it or to reinvent it or something. So like if a kid plays Dark Souls right now, like, and that's their first game, they're gonna be a person who loves Souls-like games. That's it. That's done. And then are they gonna be able to diversify? Probably very little, very minor. We are examples too. Like I still like Sonic the Hedgehog. It's my first game. Was there any other alternatives? No, there wasn't at the time. My father was able to give me a Sega Genesis, and You know, I had Sonic the Hedgehog. Then I played Sonic the Hedgehog 2, then 3, then Sonic Knuckles. It happens. So, but now, instead of just having the things your parents give you, it's anything on the internet. Anything on the internet. Just as a parent offering a lot of counter argument conversation, or at least conversation that promotes reflection on ideas, it wouldn't be a bad shout, but it should be moderated, because you could end up confusing your child, right? So information overload, like that overwhelming thing, you know how right now Gen Z people are getting really anxious, don't really know what's going on, like I don't know what to do, there's so much things happening. That is more sensitive in an early period in child. Like a child will be far faster susceptible to being overwhelmed than an adult. So it does take like ease and moderation. So one thing, I go back to my original statement about emphasizing skills that help someone slow down. Just take a breather, right? Just slow down. It's not a race. It's not the hustle culture. I think that is a skill that will pay again and again. Again and again. Like, relax. You're young. You're very impressionable. Slow down. Sit and, I don't know, play fetch with your dog. That kind of thing. So just to slow down so that the information isn't just constantly. So you could, what can I say about this? Well, kids that get an idea and you want to like counter argue it, right? And then you're saying like, no, that's not great. Like, it still takes time for human beings, especially young human beings, to form an identity. But when they're forming the identity and you give them like 4 or 5 perspectives and 6 or 7, it's overwhelming to me. Like, someone who has done this for professionally, I can't even believe how overwhelming it would be for a child with no point of reference. So like, you lean into it. I think it's kind of somewhat scary if you find that your child becomes overwhelmingly confused. That's the other extreme, just having too much information at once. And that's the other symptom of the internet. It's like, hey, this is bad, but this guy says it's good, but this guy says it's bad. That can happen still. It happens a lot less because of the way algorithms work. However, the parents tend to be the quote-unquote bad cop in this situation. So being too antagonistic, that's a compromise you have to gauge yourself. Because the child will push back, right? So you want to... There are a lot of different tricks you can, like, natural ways you can try to ease in. Like, hey, here's some ice cream. I know that this is very simplistic and rudimentary, but when you associate dopamine responses, like dopamine events, with information, it can ease a person from adapting. This works at any age, really. So like things like, hey, you know, you like this internet thing, like you like this guy, well, this guy also, you know, let's do something positive, or like, let's watch this video, say, hey, you know, this guy is saying this and this, so you're getting involved, right? You're saying like, oh, so what did this guy say before? And they're like, oh, they mentioned this and this. Well, you know, then you can introduce other ideas, because at the moment they're reliving, they're bootstrapping that thought. And then you're beginning to create another habit loop with that stimulating thing. That works with video games. That works for other things. So like, hey, you really like kicking this ball really, really hard. Well, let's go out and, kick the ball really, really hard and then talk about something else. That's kind of the a strategy that happens a lot. But that's only when you're like really, really saying like, oh, I got to break a habit or something. But a lot of times it's synergistic. So like, hey, oh, you found this really interesting. This game is really interesting. Can I ask you a few questions? Why do you think this game is really interesting? And then the person would say like, oh, because someone I know on internet really loves this game and I think I agree with him. It's like, so what parts of it do you agree with them? So what you're doing is you're enabling them to think about the things while they're doing it. So in the future, they would just associate that thought process with the content. So they will bootstrap that stuff on their own. That's kind of one of the hallmark ways of executing and helping someone develop a habit that is natural to them. So you associate with a habit that they already enable to do. And breaking habits is very similar too. Like breaking a bad habit. You, instead of finding a substitution for the habit, you're generating another habit post execution to interfere with the current habit. And eventually those habits will offer a choice of that person. It's like, oh yeah, I smoke, for example. I smoke to relax. It's like, okay. Well, then you ask the person, well, after you smoke, how about drinking some water? How do you feel after drinking some water? And it's a positive experience that's associated with smoking. It's like, oh, you're still relaxed? Well, that's good. How about like drinking water every time you smoke, after you have a smoke? And eventually it'll be like, I don't really have to smoke. I could just drink water. And then eventually I just look forward to being relaxed anyways. That's kind of how it's even more consistent with kids. So the younger you are, the less experience that an adult person would have that interferes with that type of line of thinking, because they're focused on feelings. They're focused on the visceral effect. So when your brain is high on dopamine, which is the thing you do really fun, you can associate new habits, and then those new habits become procedural. It's like, hey, when I smoke, I get relaxed, and then I drink water and I'm still relaxed. So we're gonna always now smoke and drink water. At some point, someone's gonna say, hey, smoking is bad. Like all this stuff's like, oh, okay, well, I mean, I can still drink water. I'll still feel relaxed. So that's kind of the habit forming thing. I use this, most psychologists, but with friends and stuff, I use this type of conditioning as an offer, but it's adapting. If you go see a specialist, they'll probably be a more vigorous approach than this. But generally speaking, that's kind of what is like a time-tested way of trying to develop new habits and break old habits if you so desire. Is it 4 level? It is. We are building level 5. We're building level 5s now. We just started on the first cabin. I digressed a little bit, but what if after you smoke, drink water, buy groceries, and feed the local shrike, can you also do my tag? You ask yourself that. That's how you develop routines. I've already done this for my sub. I do this a lot, so it's a bootstrap. Like, I need to see sunlight, so sunlight is very low effort, so I'll do that. At least walking out is fine, but I know that this will trigger me somehow into working, so I'm just gonna run after that. And this is also dealing with I can't really describe it really well right now, but it's called bracketing. When you bracket the process, you can get a better perspective of the before and after of something. So for example, one other trick that you can do is to bracket the events that flank the habit you want to form along with procedure. So first, the procedure is I need to get up, brush my teeth, go out, change clothes, then go out, run, come back, cold shower, get on the computer, and stream, right? So that's the procedural mindset. I just mapped out all the steps. So when you have a procedure, you can go through the steps. It almost makes things more palatable. It's a little bit less overwhelming when you break down all the procedures. Then you can bracket them. So I might be thinking, oh man, dude, running sucks. Oh my gosh, I don't want to do running. But since I have a procedural set mine already and I'm bracketing it, well, getting up, I'm already going to do that. Running, but when after I run, it's gonna feel great. I'm gonna shower and I'm gonna be like pumped for stream. So I'm seeing what's before and after instead of just specifically focusing on how much the running is going to suck. That's when you're establishing the habit. I'm no longer establishing a habit. I'm already 2 months past. Like I've done it every single day. So I'm already 2 months past. So I no longer even require to bracket the results or even think about the procedures anymore, because that's how you get into the habit. And you do that and you can expand. So you find something that creates a positive feeling. For me, the positive feeling in this bracket is basically just getting up and going outside. Like I still associate that with a positive thing, but I want to stand there. Like that's low effort for me. Stand there and look outside. That's a pleasant response. And then after the bracket, the pleasant response is going online and streaming and playing video games. So two positive things flank whatever habit I'm trying to form. And now after I establish the habit, I no longer rely on those things. I don't have to have a procedural mindset. I don't need to bracket anymore. So you can continue to stack things like that. Breaking habits was the previous modification that I mentioned before. You associate what you already have. So say now running is a positive habit. I can squeeze in. It's like, well, running, oh, my knees are bad now. I can't run anymore. So what do? Walking. Instead of after I run and my knees go bad, instead of every time running through it, I can just choose to walk a specific alternative. Eventually, I'm like, oh, it's just not cutting it. I skip running and I go to walking. And that habit will interfere by choice on the current habit that isn't paying out anymore. So that's how you kind of interfere with a habit. Back in the day, it was cold turkey. It requires a lot of willpower to do that. And willpower is often not a positive motivator. So just like, hey, this habit's bad, just don't do it anymore. Just go and break it. Well, every time it triggers that thing, you're still going to think about the bad habit. You can synergistically take advantage of that. Every time the bad habit is triggered, you can do another habit after it. And eventually you're using the same strong trigger for the bad habit to also create the interfering habit. And that creates a far lower bracket and natural progression of interfering with your old habit. And it's the end. So the last thing you're going to think about is the last thing you did. So it's easier to just jump. Most of the time, people like to jump to the end. It's kind of taking advantage of that. Yeah, and if you have a lot of willpower, Silver, like for sure, I get for absolutely certain, if you have a lot of willpower, you can just do what my father did, which is go cold turkey. What I'm saying here is what we understand about neuroscience and stuff now, all the consistent literature that can be said, this is an alternative approach. It's an approach that lines up a little bit better with the current literature now. And it's always worth a shot, because for me, just because you're taking the easy and more efficient road out doesn't mean you're less of a person, right? I'm all for the idea. I'm all for the idea that your pride and your willpower, you have so much willpower, you can go cold turkey and quit nicotine, for sure. That's so admirable. It's respectful and whatnot. But personally, I would take over 20 people have taking the easy or like the easier road consistently, having more people happier than people saying, "Hey, this is the only way to quit. You have to go cold turkey." That's just it. And that's kind of what happened when back in the day. That's all you had though. Like quitting nicotine, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, this type of method wouldn't be something observable that well. So instead, you just use that impulse and just, heck, all right, maybe it's not quitting nicotine. Habits don't have to associate. You don't have to associate the counter habit. It's not the goal of stopping the habit. It's the goal of creating a new habit on top of it. So every time you can even use it as a power, like a fueling for something else that may not help you quit nicotine, but at least it uses that impulse to do something else, right? So it may not be a win-win, like, hey, I'm going to do something to quit nicotine by doing it after. It's like, that's difficult. So what you do is you supplant it with something else. It's like, all right, I need to smoke. All right, I'm going to go chew gum. Like after I smoke, I'm going to chew gum or something. Not the other way around where you chew gum to stop the impulse. That used to be like the kind of dogmatic way of approaching it, where, oh, if you are thinking about having a smoke, or if you think about you need a nicotine hit, just chew gum. Well, you don't get the nicotine hit. So you're immediately eliminating the dopamine, the positive feedback. You're not associating. It's not a positive feeling. It's a negative feeling over and over again. You're depriving yourself of that. Oh, the more natural way, in my opinion, to flow into it is, hey, you need that nicotine. All right, slap on your nicotine. Now what else do you do? I am gonna go run 3 miles. And then every time you slap on a nicotine, you're gonna feel like you're gonna want to run 3 miles. Maybe something more reasonable, because it depends on how often your impulse is. Because it has to be something realistic. You have to figure out a timing, consistency, and how practical it is. So, for example, you have an impulse, a nicotine impulse, and it occurs like 10 times a day, maybe 12 times, like a pack a day. I forgot how big cigarette packs are, but like, say you're a traditional, like that's where your nicotine source is, like goes back to like 12 times a day. You get like an urge 12 times a day. Do a push-up. Yeah. Yeah. So that's it. Yeah. And then at some point, the dopamine from your nicotine impulse can become associated with your push-ups, and you can wean off the nicotine because you get the same similar dopamine response from doing the push-ups. It's still going to be not the same. Absolutely. Your hit of nicotine is a chemically induced thing. It's one of the most difficult things to overcome, because chemically induced is zero effort. Like, there's no mechanical input to get that dopamine, but you are at least using it to associate a different habit. And it makes, as long as more habits come after, you have options to offset needing to feel nice, feel great. Another approach is Counter in your example case, I get my nicotine, but I put a penny in the jar. That's still my. It's not a. It's. Oh yeah, a counter. Yeah, a counter of how many times. Yeah, as in like a literal counter. That's fair. That's fair. Um, the idea is, does putting the penny in the jar feel good? Like, have you started associating that every time you put a penny in a jar, it feels good? That's the main core of what I'm saying, what I'm suggesting. So, Silver, if he utilizes that, push-ups will make him feel good every time that impulse comes up. I'm not sure if it's the same with putting a penny in a jar. It's not as salient, it's not as strong, unless somehow you've convinced yourself that putting it in a jar is very productive. So that will, when you, if it reminds you of something bad, you will less likely abandon it because you are constantly reminded how bad it feels. You're trying to use positive reinforcement. Like, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but putting a penny in a jar is reminding you you have a bad habit. The goal is to remind yourself that you don't have a bad habit. You have a habit that's optional. So the focus is that Silver will continue to do push-ups and forget that it's even important to have the nicotine bump. When you're putting in a penny of a jar, you're constantly reminding yourself that that habit exists. So you're trying to play a trick on yourself. You're trying to remove thinking about it being important. Saying and acknowledging it's a bad habit is constantly reminding you that it's there. So it will only reinforce the bad habit. It will constantly make you think about the bad habit over and over again. You're just trying to remove yourself from it entirely. And this works. This is a pattern that is elucidated from successful people's routines. And we're talking about real things, right? Like health oriented things, but it goes beyond that. Um, how do I illustrate that? I generally share anecdote stories about how I think about things. The first thing I do is when someone offers me a convincing argument, my first thing is to test. Oh, okay, this is really pleasant. Oh, yeah, that's a great story. Like, I like it. I've already attached a habit to it to challenge it. I null hypothesis test the moment someone tries to convince me otherwise, right? Like, convince me. I like hearing people's story. I'm a gullible person. I'm a very gullible person. That's why I'm terrible with jokes. When someone makes a joke, I think it's real. Like, so what do I do now? I attach another habit to it. Every time someone tells me a very provocative story, the first thing I do is I null hypothesis test. I ask myself, what are the alternative answers? And it's no longer something that I cannot do. It's a habit. For better or for worse, for me, I feel it's better, so I choose to keep the habit. For others, you could say, "Oh, I'm becoming too argumentative," so you can break the habit if you want in the same method. But for me, the way I critically think is a routine that I've done using this approach. I didn't know this was the approach. Like, I've done this for over 15 years or more. I didn't know this is what it is, but it makes sense. Conveniently, coincidentally, it makes sense. I'm still now, right the moment I'm saying this, I have a habit. I'm like, it's a coincidence still. So I'm already doing the habit, even though I'm saying, oh, this fits really well. This must be true. It's like, no, well, not really. We're not sure. There's a lot of counter arguments to this that I can think about. So that habit is still there, even when I'm talking about the habit. But this whole routine of critical thinking was established the same way in retrospect. So not knowing all this stuff, what made me successful in my PhD is this thing I'm describing that people are talking about now in a more scientific way, like about like hormones and neurotransmitters. Like they're trying to fill in the gaps, and it's so convenient. It's a convenient narrative because what they're doing is they're analyzing successful habit forming people and trying to fill in with what the current knowledge is that support those habits. So it's still a coincidence, in my opinion. It's still corollary, right? However, it fits really neat, which is great. It's a great affirmation of what I've been doing. But at the same time, it doesn't defeat the fact that by coincidence, the vast majority of successful people develop routines by this method, or by a method that this conveniently explains. It's not like no one has taken like a child or a blank sheet and did that from beginning to end to show that it's causal. It's just corollary. But it fits so neatly and so statistically undeniably enriched that it's a very strong thesis. It's a very strong theory. So basically, over the years, we learn all about these things. And then if you take 99.9% of the small percentile of upper echelon successful people, it fits in all their routines. So it's pretty strong. It's a very strong correlation, but it's still a correlation. And it's something you can choose to try out yourself as a non-professional advice, right? Non-professional advice. And I'm not, the thing that I'm saying now, I'm not trying this because I have already been doing it, but it's reassuring that what I'm doing has more strength. And it also gives me a little bit of comfort because I've been doing this for a while now. What I mean is when I tell the story of my life and I like talk about what I do to create and break habits or like create routines and stuff, at least it kind of feels like, hey, that's great. The data agrees with what I've been unintentionally telling people by example. So that's great. That's awesome. In the next 10 years, it might not be the reality. And I'm also accepting of that too. And there's my null hypothesis habit going off. And it always sounds like this. I'm genuinely conditioned to sound like this. Whenever I propose a bold statement, which I consider this very bold, even though 4 or 5 specialists and like 60 different psychologist groups published similar findings and correlations, it can still change because humans are weird. And I don't like doing science with human beings because human beings are weird. There are so many other fun research things. Maybe I'll find ways to create a funny story or an interesting, engaging story with it. But there's a lot more like interesting studies that I always come across because my entire algorithm, right? My entire YouTube feed and algorithm is just filled with like 80 different studies every single time. When I'm scrolling, it's like I just don't have time to digest all of these. And then like hunt down the primary literature and stuff. I've gotten to the point where some people I even trust wholeheartedly as the primary summation meta analyst. So they're doing the meta analysis for me, and I'm just trusting them because there's just so much information so often. But yeah, that's a good digression on habit forming, and that's how I trained for the marathon. That's I just think back now, hearing this stuff, and I was doing a deep dive in it for my own benefit. That's how I trained for the marathon. I just can't believe I did that in 3 months. I went from running 1 mile to trying to run. What is the marathon? Is it 26? It's like a little over 26 miles. Yeah, 26 miles. Yeah, in 3 months. Just so you know, like most habits, right? Like most habits, uh, I was I was bedridden after it though. So, like addiction, like dopamine things, when you associate these things, you can burn out. Like, it's a good feeling. You will start attaching a great feeling to something, but you can also do it too much. And yeah, there is such thing as overworking out, getting overzealous. When go online, when was the last time you heard a kid who got addicted to working out and by 18 they had like two torn ACLs and like so it is dangerous to an extreme too. So you have to as an adult, someone who knows their body, that's great. As a kid, you could get a kid to do something without restraint and discipline is required because feeling good about doing something that costs the utility of your body can still be just as detrimental. So I was like bedridden for a week. Like it was so hardcore, and it all started with I didn't even want to run 1 mile. Like, I just don't want to run. And then suddenly, fast forward 3 months, it became 26 miles, and it was too fast, too quick, too early, too overzealous, and I just basically I was bedridden for 2 weeks, and then when I tried to go back, my left foot just didn't feel the same. All today it took 3 years of not running, maybe 4 years, 4 years of not running, and then now I'm starting to run again, and it doesn't feel like I have a phantom cramp in my left ankle. Like it's not. I don't think it's there anymore, but I'm absolutely certain that it is not a physical thing. It's a psychosomatic thing that I constantly feel like there's a cramp in my left foot for every time I try to go and run again, it just comes up. So I just stopped running for 2.5 years, just like completely just not. So now I'm building up from scratch again. It's really hard to run like 2 miles, and that's dangerous. And actually, it explains the cycle of how kids get overzealous and burn out. And the internet does that super well. Like, you want to form a new habit? Go on YouTube Shorts, look at a video. What happens? The dopamine response from your first clip will go into your next clip, then your next clip, then your next clip. And then eventually, by the time the dopamine sensitivity fades away for the day, you will have already formed a habit of seeing like 6 different trends. And then what happens? You go back and you do the same thing, and it will reinforce those 6 trends. What have they done to you? They basically farmed you for viewership and ad revenue. At what? The expense of your time and your body. Because what we do for habit is at the expense of the utility of our body and mind. Yep. It sounds really simple, but it's so hard, it's dynamic, it's complex, and it might not be the entire picture. And it's subject to change. But it fits so neatly. And my scientific mind is telling me when something fits so neatly, careful. Grain of salt, right? Kind of thing. For me, that's probably the best digression I've listened in terms of something I can use myself. And I think I kid you not, I'm 68 days in, and I can say if I lean in long enough, 6 or 7 months down the line, I'll probably be up to 12 miles again. Only this time, I'm not going to be a papega and like say, oh yeah, like I'm 20 years old. I can like, it's okay. It's just a little leg pain. I can run through it. So after running, right? After running, I've added routines that will help me offset how hard I'm pushing my body. Like the rest of the day, I'm sitting now. When I was practicing for the marathon, after I run that, when I started running, it's after I spent 10 hours standing and pacing around in the lab. And then I go and practice running for the marathon. My routine included standing and running and walking an incredible, unrealistic amount of time. Now I'm just sitting around. Like once I go, I tell myself, hey, skip leg day. All right, skip leg day. You're sitting around a lot, so that's great. And a lot of people would say, oh man, that's such a bad habit. You're always sitting in front of your computer. It's like, well, let's just say I'm pushing myself really hard in another time. And guess what? This is officially now a happy habit. I deliberately made running more pleasant because if I run, I get to sit down for the rest of the day. And that's how the bracketing, when you bracket your mindset and then have a procedure, that's where it all fed into it. So now I go out, I run knowing that I get to sit down and stream. That's and the early thing, getting up and seeing sunlight, I know that I get to do that because I get to sleep better. Because I'm like really wired now. So when you load all your high activity stuff into your dopamine routine, like your dopamine induced routine, generally I used to typically have too much stamina. Like my stamina is just racing all the way to like, way past my bedtime. So now it's like, no, I'm actually exhausted by the end of the day. So I'm just sleeping, and the only thing that can confirm that I've slept well is I always wake up on that moment, go out, do my run. So now like we're getting into clockwork. It doesn't have to be like in the morning. Like I decided to routine myself to fit my schedule. I vape and that's basically all the time. So I'm thinking, maybe I need to be drinking water. Yes. Yep. Yeah. 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 Drinking water is like the de facto low effort thing. And you might be thinking, do we have any data that suggests that? Dieting. And what I mean is not that how effective dieting is when you change the food content, but the one consistent thing that tends to fit in most diets is drinking water. But it's a low effort of associating an end positive goal with a low entry habit. It's not because you get to eat certain things. It's not because those methods didn't work because they're inconsistent. But drinking water, it's usually about the last thing you do in a routine. It explains that too. So while this might start to sound like a persuasive piece and is subject to confirmation bias, it does fit really, really well. I'm still going to reiterate that there can be a better theory in the future, like that better fits with more data. But right now, it fits so neatly to explaining anything that's somewhat habit forming. That goes with nutrition, dieting. So if being aware of this can help anyone reshape their habits, that's like a win. That's a win for humanity, in my opinion. That's a win for anyone. It goes without saying, time will tell. Time will tell. But it was really enlightening. And then the more I dug into it, the more I'm like, oh, okay, I'm a believer. I'm a believer for now. Does it impact my life? It doesn't. So that's odd. But all I can think about is, well, what other people can impact. Just so you know, is this a novel idea and I should be milking it and like telling everyone in the world? There's already people doing that. There are already like 5 or 6 really prominent, extremely influential people who can explain this better and more coherent. So I am not making this like it's my idea or anything. It's not only is it in the primary literature in which I could confirm that they are accurate, that it's just something that is also trending. And many credible people who have done this way longer than I have, who could conservatively say they are experts. However, they're not going to because the content, the platform doesn't have standardization. You can go and visit these ideas. You'll probably find a lot of reputable people who would say this is the most provocative approach to date. And being aware of this approach can shape people's lives. You can probably spin it differently. You can find out, oh, maybe it doesn't work, but how can you like alter it to help and whatnot? So it's pretty great. It was wonderful. I was going deep in the rabbit hole, but I had such a dopamine hit from just the idea of how can you apply this to other things. Like just to me, to a lot of people who are watching is probably it's no big deal, it doesn't affect me and stuff's like, well, but what about other people? What about people you like, people you love, people you associate with? There's so many ways you can apply this that doesn't have to do with yourself. And I can honestly say if I was a little bit more selfish and disagreeable, I would have write it off as well, at least that confirms some things that I know about myself, but it's no big deal because it literally doesn't change anything about my life's pattern, but it can change a lot of other people. That's why those like 3 or 4 influential people have like 7 million, 8 million views. That could explain it. Other ways to explain the viewership is it's really provocative. It's very sensational. So perhaps. And then the trend and the algorithm reinforces that. So we still have to take into account that. But it's great. It's awesome. That's probably the digression for today. It's largely revolving around habit formation. Habit formation. What was one of these individuals stated a resounding, I don't know the validity of this, but I can probably comfortably agree with it. It might even be a conservative number. Oh, and I'm going to say safely over 70% of a human's activity, conscious activity, heck, you might as well just throw sleep in there. So over 70% is formed on habits. It's what we call habitual behavior. Not conscious, like not necessarily fully conscious decision making, like complexity that at that level. Over 70% of it is habitually formed. It was once complex. It's to say habitual behavior is one of the results of perhaps a lifetime of complex decision making. To become more and more efficient, it's to accept that humans continuously form habitual behavior selectively because it increases the efficiency, hence the appeal or perceived productivity of a human being. And productivity is often linked to dopamine response, but that dopamine response becomes associated with the perspective of whether it's negative or positive. And yes, in the end of the day, forming, quote, bad habits and good habits is based on the value system you attribute it to that dopamine. But knowing how dopamine works and reinforces habits is not a morality thing. It's just a thing that now corollary studies say it just happens. This is the thing that we can observe. Is it good or bad? Well, it's based on your value system. So in the end of the day, you can deliberately end up forming bad habits, but being aware of it can at least give you control of the things you value can be used, right? So you can at least feel like you're in control of your own habits, or at least be able to like shape your habits. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. Oh, and another thing that 2 or 3 people mentioned is the period of habit forming. And this is where you have to figure out yourself because the variation is gigantic. Because we know value systems perceive hardness and difficulty. Here's the range. The range of habit formation, like the time it takes to form a new habit, ranges from 18 days, I think, at the shortest, to 256 days. So there's not enough data or longer enough samples to even striate or parse how to determine how long it takes to develop your habit. Okay, so when it goes from procedural, bracketing those things to a habit. Yeah, yeah. It's not necessarily you can still think about the habit. You can still continue to think about it when you want. It's the point when you can do it without having to think about it. So what I mean is about that is you can choose to think about your habit. Habits you don't just lose the capacity to think about it. But when you get to a point where like, nah, I don't even have to worry about it. I just do it. That's when it becomes habitual behavior. But you can still actively say, I have this habit and I can go through the steps at any time. But you can do it without motivation. You can do it without relying on other strategies to force yourself to do it. It no longer comes as a cost. The habit doesn't seem like a cost anymore. That is when it reaches habitual. Yeah. Yeah, without input, there's no barrier to doing it. Like when you get up and brush your teeth, for example, one of the fundamental behaviors is brushing your teeth. You might be saying, "Oh yeah, but sometimes I don't brush my teeth." But there's a limit to it. When you go out, you probably have thought about it probably triggered you to brush your teeth. But it's something that, oh no, you don't even want to think about it, but it just comes up. It's just like, oh yeah, yeah, that's I should do that. Like it's so low, it's like almost mandatory. So it becomes mandatory. Yeah, yeah. So you've already associated some things that become habitual. So it's not only a lack of motivation, it's also almost obligatory because you have to think of it like your nicotine addiction, right? You have an impulse. Not only do you not even want to think about it, you're going to think about it technically when the impulse is triggered. So let's think about it this way, right? You can do that for dieting in a way, but the way people have done it for dieting is a different perspective. And when we were talking about overriding older habits, it's not. Here's a classical approach: dieting. All right, well, you eat less, right? You caloric deficit. Okay, so, oh man, I really want a cake. All right, well, I have to have a salad. So every time you go and say, oh, I want something sugary, well, I gotta deprive myself of the dopamine and eat a salad instead. Here's the catch: you have an impulse to eat a cake. It's like, well, all right, I'll have a piece of cake. Then I'll eat the salad. And then you repeat that a couple of times. Like, well, I have a craving for a cake, but I also have craving for a salad. Like, all right, well, I'll take the salad today. It's like I'm getting even more now because now it's like, all right, if I skip the cake, I can have the cake whenever I want, but now I can just choose the salad. So it's kind of it's a slight change in order of operation. But what happens is you're not reminding yourself. You're not constantly reminding yourself what you're missing. You're constantly reminding yourself what you're gaining. So it's great. It's a positive forward. It's not a negative. And if you break down the diets, guess which diet method actually worked best? It was Weight Watchers. Like there's so many diets that happen all that time, and Weight Watchers isn't even a specific diet. It just gives you scores. And what does the score do? It tells you when you're doing something positive. It's telling you what you're allowed to have, like what you can allocate yourself. It's not telling you what you need to take away. So one of the most time-tested ways that dieting works is to allow people to allocate all their points over the day. And over time, they form the habit of telling it, and they no longer need the service anymore. Yeah. That's and it still fits in it still fits in the model, but this model didn't really exist, to be honest. It's not like the thing, but it explains a lot of things. And I am looking for specific cases that support this, right? So you have to glean what are the things that failed. Is there a model that allocate things that failed? Yes. A model that didn't accurately measure the content. So it can be exploited. Like you can have a diet that doesn't tell you correct, accurate measurements, right? And then it can become a terrible experience. You could end up gaining weight because the information is inaccurate. So it's just as dangerous. However, that's what happened. So, hey, all right, well, I can have the cake. That just means I know that I have this many points left. But it's not, I can't have this because I have to take away this. Like, you're taking away things constantly. Whenever you're constantly taking away things, you're reminding yourself that you're missing that thing. You're just constantly, every single time you say I can't do this, you've already thought about it. And the idea is to just get your mind off of it. It's just redefining what you do. So what is the best example I have in my life is that when I fail, I immediately think of all the things that I gained from failing. I don't ever felt like failure has ever been a negative experience. And it hasn't since when I basically tanked the MCATs when I was 21. So it's been almost 15 years since I've last felt that failure was a negative experience. The moment I fail is the moment I can find anything that I've learned from it. That's the first habit I form following a failure. So if I fail a task, like when I play a roguelike game or something, and I immediately fail the run, the first thing I go into is like, oh hey, all right, so what can I collect from it? There's no longer a negative attachment to it. But here's the deal though. I did something before failure, right? I know that I'm playing a game that I like, right? I'm playing a game to learn something. That's flanking. Procedurally, I need to play a game that I want to play already and learn from. So first, the first step is I pick a game. Well, I pick a game. I want to learn something from it. I'm going to fail probably to learn it. I literally fail. And then I'm going to gain something that I'm learning from it, which was my original purpose of learning the game. And then I go back and do the same thing. So the dopamine is coming from playing the game that I want to learn. The failure has become associated with my dopamine from playing the game. And then the learning process is positive for me. So the only thing I'm focusing on is what I can learn from failing. It's no longer because failing is a bad feeling. It's because I get to play a game to learn. So I no longer focus. It's rarely ever about when I fail, it leaves little to no impact on me at all. Like the goal was never to fail or succeed. It was to get a learning experience. And it's the same principle. It's the same. I didn't think that's not how I would phrase it. Like that's not how I would describe what was happening. I would say like, oh, anything you do in life is learning experience. That's how I convinced myself how it worked, right? And stuff. In fact, I've convinced myself through the idea that my life is composed of failing the primary objective, but my life I become more skilled and grew vastly more from a failure to achieve the primary objective than to achieve the primary objective. So if I quantified, I got to this state not because of this framework that I'm talking about now. I got to this state where one day when I was 21, I was probably having a midlife crisis, if I'm being honest with myself, because I'm not sure if I can become a medical doctor. I don't have the choice at the time because I tanked my MCATs, right? And I can say that without even having any emotional baggage whatsoever. At the time, it was devastating, absolutely devastating, but it's no longer a big deal to me. So I tanked my MCATs when I was 21. So I went down and I sat down and I wrote out the weight, the giving myself a perspective. How many times, what have I gained at every time this happened? And then every time I succeeded in going out and doing the exact thing that I wanted to achieve. And it was undisputably like at least 70 to 80% of the things I could name came from what I didn't intend to learn. So all I can tell myself is every time I go out to do something and I manage to fail to achieve the primary objective, there are like 60 or 70 alternative objectives that I can go back and figure out that I can do. I can gather from that experience. So now when someone gets angry at me and like I fail to make friends with a stranger, what else can I gather from it? I've learned a lot of things that clearly didn't work for that stranger. I've learned that I have a gap in my knowledge and communication. Let's go through. There's just limitless things to distract me from the idea that I pretty much failed at that time for the primary objective. So in a person's life, you spend more time not achieving the primary objective. Actually, here's a hot take. I could even argue 100% of the time, for most, at least younger kids, 100% of the time, they are not achieving their primary objective through their entire life, up to whatever the age. Let's say 21. Know why? Because their goal is to be the best in something. 100% of the time, you are not the best at a young age. There are, or maybe 0.01% of 18-year-olds could possibly think they have achieved the goal that they were in mind, the primary goal that they were in mind. So realistically, even applying their logic, most of the time, all your experience and your value and your learning and your growth exponentially comes from failing to achieve your primary objective, not to achieve your primary objective. So in that landscape, there are very few things I've ever done after that midlife crisis. That was a big turning point. Like, I've finally been told that you can't just cram for a few days and be ready for medical school. So that was my rude awakening. I don't know where your first roadblock is. My roadblock was, in retrospect, absurd. It was absolutely absurd. And I don't even pass for a genius. Like, I'm not even in that neighborhood of a genius, let alone thinking that, oh, hey, some people spend like 2 years doing this, but somehow I had the arrogance and the confidence to think that a week is how much time I needed, when the average person takes like 2 years. Like, that's what happens when you spend uh when you're unchallenged. Like, that's the complacency. It gets that bad. It gets pretty bad, and I am no stranger to being having a rude awakening. It's not even a humble pie. It's a it's a humble mountain thrown at my face. Like, the mountain legitimately just crushed my face that day. So I don't think there's anything that can be bigger than that mountain. Nowadays, it's like, yeah, I'm going to beat this game. Like, I'm gonna finish Bear and Breakfast at some point when I stop digressing over and over again, some way. But you know what? That's my primary objective, is to beat Bear and Breakfast. But what am I doing now? It's not gonna hurt me. Like, what am I doing now? I'm achieving an alternative objective. I'm sharing information and talking about stuff. This can wait. Now, if someone comes in and loves this game and say, hey, can you just play the game? There you go. You found my example, the counter example of a person who has a different mindset. So whichever works for you, right? I'm not saying do what I do, or do as, what was that saying? Like, do as you do, not like, do as I say, but not do as I do. Wait, is it the other way? I want to flip it. So, like, uh, uh, I don't know. It's the thing where, like, someone tells you to do something, but they themselves don't do it. I forgot what the saying was. It's something like, do as I say, but don't do as I do, because I might be doing something else that's different from what I'm saying. Oh wait, that is applicable. That is the saying I'm saying. So I'm suggesting something, but I myself might not think or do exactly what I say, because I don't think it works for everyone. Yeah, do as I say, not as I do. Yes. So that's, and it's not an idiom to take literally. It's an idiom to take to illustrate that someone else's solution is not wholeheartedly and literally some other person's solution, and it might not even be the solution that they're using. They might be using a variance of that solution. So that is the grain of salt. It's more or less saying grain of salt by trusting someone. But yeah, let me know. I really want to know how effective this is. The thing that makes me very enthusiastic about what I'm saying right now is I haven't thought of it this way. So the thing that makes these people's, that's why I watch other experts, other people talk about things. It's a perspective that is so much simpler to express. And that's what makes them, viral content creators. I mean, that person's primary job isn't a content creation. So that that also speaks volumes that this person is viral but has a, a day job as a neuroscientist. Um, so it was really refreshing that I could express this way instead of my really harshly convoluted way. Like the thing I just described, that sounds like effort. Like, do you want to sit down and convince yourself statistically that the reality is that most of the things you fail to do, shape you more than the things you've like, do you really think that's really approachable? Like, how many people would know how I'm expressing that and doing that task? That is a huge barrier of to come to the same realization. So pragmatically, this person's explanation was fantastic. It was concise. It fit in a 4-minute video. Meanwhile, whatever I did would take like 6 to 7 hours to explain. Yeah, 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 yeah. It would be tough. It would be really tough. So that's that's communication, man. That's so brilliant. And yes, most of my ideas that are concise and maybe provocative doesn't come from me. It's not that I can't, it's not that we as anybody, as a human being, can't come to the same conclusions, like infer the same thing. It just shows you the difference between someone who spends so much time publicly speaking and educating. That's the difference of experience. Like the explainer that I used was someone else's, it's a paraphrasing or it's an interpretation, but largely unchanged from the core ideas of this person. I didn't come up with the idea, but I can agree with all the ideas this person took, but their approach to explaining it was so much more effective. And that's easily the reason why I still watch people. Like, if I don't agree with this person, I'm still gonna watch it because this these people spend so much time convincing other people that what they're saying is credible. You gotta respect that skill. That skill is amazing. Like, I could probably sell you snake oil. I mean, I just I'm gonna be honest. I can probably do that pretty well, but I'm not going to, obviously, because I have my own moralities and ethics and whatnot, and I think there's plenty of snake oil salesmen online now, like content creators sell snake oil all the time. So I don't think there's a shortage. Do I think they're decent at it? Yes. Do I think they're excellent at it? No. A resounding no. It doesn't. That actually doesn't quite take too much to convince someone to spend money. So that's unfortunate. But with individuals like the people that I'm referring to nebulously, I don't want to mention names and stuff because names tend to get a little complicated. Um, they understand that raising awareness of it at least gives people the cautious choice that they know that we know a lot about manipulative behavior, or at least overall, behaviorally wise. And exploiting that is something that can only be combated with awareness. If you're not aware of it, then, well, you can still be happy because the thing that they're exploiting is making people happy. That sounds very dark. It's not to say making people happy, however false it is great morally or justifyingly, but pragmatically, the nicotine is making you happy, Silver, if you know what I mean. Like, pragmatism doesn't have morality, it does not have ethics. What the truth is in the biology is that it's making you happy, even if it's temporary. And it's like constantly making your body ache for more happiness, happy sauce. So that's the pragmatism, and that's microtransactions, pre-ordering bonuses, DLC, your favorite content creators merch, which is like a regular mug with the their printed logo on the mug. That's 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 the dopamine thing. So, or not necessarily just the dopamine thing. It's just the one that's most reliable right now. Because when it comes to hormonal neurochemicals, it's difficult to know. I think the phrase "making your body ache for more happy sauce" might also be a good. But yeah, yeah. So, um, there's also, it's gotten to the point where we have too much happy sauce. That's a whole different digression, and that's a current field of study. It's a current line of thought, of theory on how to moderate and resensitize the body's necessity, like how to regulate externally or at least conditionally the body's ability to being overstimulated by happy sauce. Because I don't know about you, but when that happy sauce comes in the form of a cake, eventually you're going to eat so much cake that it's not sustainable anymore. I mean, go with coffee and all that other stuff, right? So that is an active, very active field. I don't know how neurologists and psychobiologists and psychologists, behavioral psychologists specifically, maybe even some cognitive psychologists, psychobios, how they're like synthesizing ways to address the the super super availability of dopamine, the happy sauce. And even then, we have to remember dopamine is just a potential molecule that is the most studied. I would say one of the most studied that's associated with the feeling of happiness. It's not to say that there's other things that are understudied. So it just happens to be the one that coincidentally would be the first that is more likely to be studied. Timing is one thing that science doesn't emphasize too often because most people focus on order. So, like, the first thing that comes first doesn't necessarily make it the most important. That's a logical fallacy that so many use because it's a framework that bolsters habit forming and behavioral bias and like cognitive bias. The first thing that comes first is the OG. It must be the important, is the progenitor. But generally speaking, when science discovers something, it's the first. There's absolutely probably no like it's actually probably conservatives say it's likely not the most important. In the long run, it's probably the first thing to be discovered is likely not to be the most important thing. It's usually more complex than that. However, it doesn't stop us from using that. Like, hey, this is really important. It's like because everyone refers to it, it's like, well, it's important. Everyone refers to it because it's the only thing we know so far. It doesn't make it not important, but it doesn't make it the most important. You can't know without knowing everything. So we don't know everything. So it's just important now. And that's kind of one of the things that you're the best if the pool of potential contestants is you. You're always going to be the best if you're the only one. So dopamine is kind of like that. Dopamine right now is the focus because it's the most studied or it's the most referred. It might not be the end all be all kind of thing, that whole like phrasing, but it is used a lot and we're going to refer to it because that's what we know, or at least what I know a little bit. All right. I'll put this in digression under habit formation at some point. I haven't done a digression in a while. But now we're gonna try to. Now we're gonna go back and try to rehabilitate our mansion. Can I?